Let's now take an imaginary carbon footprint and just walk through it and break it down step by step to understand where these emissions are coming from and which sections of your business are contributing towards it. So, as mentioned earlier, Scope 3 is going to be a really big part of your emissions. Scope 1 and 2 might be zero, or it might be quite limited in terms of the amount here, unless you're doing certain activities that are very intensive. Let's imagine this company's got 30 employees, they're a manufacturing company, and their footprint has very neatly turned out to be around 100 tonnes of emissions of CO2e. Their Scope 1 might be 16 tonnes of emissions, Scope 2 might be 8 tonnes, and Scope 3 around 76 tonnes. If we dive into Scope 1 and really look at what is generating the emissions in the Scope 1 category, it's going to be things like the company-owned vehicles, so if they've got delivery vans that are doing deliveries nationwide, or maybe company cars that are used for sales trips, then that is going to be mostly their company-owned vehicles that are contributing towards their Scope 1. Is also going to be, and this is likely a much bigger part of it, any gas that is being used on site for heating. So if you have a gas boiler on site, that is going to be a really big part of your Scope 1 emissions and can be a considerable chunk in terms of tonnes. The same goes for your domestic heating. If you've got a gas boiler at home, that might be generating around 2 tonnes of emissions per year from the gas you're burning. In terms of Scope 2, this is the electricity consumption, so any lighting, any heating, any air conditioning, any devices you've got that are running, any machinery, any equipment like that, anything that plugs into a wall is essentially your Scope 2 emissions. And this is where we'll look at some examples later of how to identify which of those devices are using the most energy and therefore which ones you might want to either upgrade or manage the usage of. In terms of solar panels, they can reduce down the amount of electricity that is being consumed and therefore can reduce down those Scope 2 emissions quite effectively. However, they do not count as a negative. They do not undo emissions. They only avoid those emissions being consumed and created. And as many of us know, I think solar panels are a really good way to cut down your business energy bills as well. And we have seen some cases of payback periods being as little as 2 years, depending on how you're using that electricity. So again, reduction here is key, and solar panels are a great example of that reduction. Moving on to Scope 3, again we start to see that this is really where we get the bulk of our emissions from. It's around 3/4, and that's going to be any travel to business events, so getting on the train or maybe getting on a plane to go to an event or to showcase an event or doing any exhibitions. And equally, if you've got a vehicle that you're maybe using for business travel to client sites, that's also going to be included in here. One that often gets overlooked is staff commuting. This is a really big part of your carbon footprint, and looking at your premises to understand how you're allowing people to come to work or to come to events is really key. 30 employees might be only working on average 3 days a week in the office. It might be hybrid working, but we're still going to see quite a high level of emissions coming from that because it does stack up in terms of the amount of journeys that people are making. In terms of logistics as well, things that you might be shipping items abroad, UK distribution as well is going to come into this between different sites or different customers, and also shipping goods to retailers, distributors, etc. That's where a lot of the emissions might be coming from, is that, again, transport-based logistics. However, we also want to go beyond just the transport piece and look at things like purchases. What software are we buying? Where is office? What consumables are being used in the office, such as paper, pens, etc. Any technology that you're buying as well. So any computing equipment is going to be part of your Scope 3. Water consumption also comes under this in terms of the things that you're consuming as you operate. So again, if you're using manufacturing processes that might be using quite a lot of water, that's going to be a really big part of this. And finally, waste as well. So any food waste from events might be counted here, but also any office waste that you're producing, or equally any faulty products. If you're running like an e-commerce store, for example, any returns that you're getting that then needs to be disposed of, that is going to be part of your carbon footprint too. In the next section, we're going to look at net zero versus carbon neutral. There's some very big differences there, and it's really important to understand this in the context of a carbon footprint and why we need that.